Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us Across the Fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Flooding is one of the stories that's been dominating the national news. The images coming from the Midwest, particularly Nebraska and Iowa, are as heartbreaking as they are devastating. So far this spring, our region has been spared of widespread flooding, but viewers from Quebec to Vermont know we're not immune from danger and destruction. The record-setting floods of 2011 in the Lake Champlain Basin of Vermont and New York and the Richelieu River in Quebec prompted the U.S. and Canadian governments to work together with the goals of mitigating future flooding and to help improve flood forecasting. Today, we're going to learn more about that work, starting with a video that highlights the lake basin and how it is impacted by man and Mother Nature.
Lake Champlain and the Richelieu River form a large, complex watershed shared by two countries. The communities that populate this watershed in Quebec, Vermont, and New York often experience the effects of wind, waves, and rain in very different ways. This video will look at the factors that affect water levels in this large transboundary basin and answer such questions as, how does the water flow out of the lake? Why do the lake and river flood? And why some communities experience extreme weather in different ways, such as the floods in 2011. A large portion of the basin, 84%, is in the United States. Only 16% lies in Canada. Streams drain from the slopes of the Adirondack Mountains in New York and the Green Mountains in Vermont into Lake Champlain. The Lake Champlain drainage basin is about 19 times as large as the lake, so the lake level can rise significantly in a few weeks when runoff is high. The water flows northward, and as Lake Champlain narrows near Rouse's Point, New York, it becomes the Richelieu River. The relatively small river is the only outlet for the lake, so it can take many weeks for high water supplies to flow out of Lake Champlain. Some have said it is like draining a swimming pool with a garden hose. The river flows through flat terrain as it exits the lake. In fact, the Richelieu River only drops about 30 centimeters or 1 foot between the lake and Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. From there, the slope of the river is steeper for most of its length until near where it empties into the St. Lawrence River at the city of Sorel-Tracy, Quebec. Water levels in the basin are affected by a variety of factors. For instance, the rock shoals at Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu form a natural barrier that controls the outflow from Lake Champlain. When the level of Lake Champlain rises, more water can pass over this restriction, and when the lake level decreases, so does the flow over the shoals. A number of structures that are no longer in use continue to impede flow in the Richelieu River, such as dikes to divert flow to mills and stone formations used to trap eels. There is no structure in the river that regulates the flow, though efforts were made to build a dam. In 1939, construction started on Friar Island Dam, but was halted due to World War II. The full project was never completed, so the dam was never operational. The Champlain Canal is another structure that has affected flows in the Richelieu River. Widening of the canal into the river channel in the early 1970s restricted the flow in the river and raised water levels. Wind is another factor that can affect water levels throughout the basin. For example, high winds lasting 6 hours or more can substantially raise one end of Lake Champlain and lower the other. This can change outflows from the lake and cause dramatic changes in water level on the Richelieu River. These factors came into play during the spring of 2011. Snowfall over the previous winter had been the third highest on record. Record-setting rainfall and extreme snowmelt caused Lake Champlain and the Richelieu River to flood. From March through May 2011, rainfall was 2.5 times the average for the basin. Waters reached flood levels in April and remained there until mid-June, a total of 67 days. High water levels and wind-driven waves battered the lake shoreline, inundating lakeshore houses and other low-lying structures. Close to 4,000 homes were damaged in both countries. Flooding was most extensive in the flat floodplain of the Richelieu River. Nearly 80% of damages from the flood occurred in Quebec. The flood was one of Quebec's longest-lasting natural disasters, wearing out residents physically and mentally. Tropical Storm Irene brought significant rainfall to the southern portion of the Champlain Basin in August of that year, complicating things even further for many communities in the U.S. Flooding impacts from Irene were felt most acutely in the tributaries in the U.S., where surging streams devastated both infrastructure and personal property. Though experiences with extreme weather may differ across the basin, everyone is ultimately connected by the basin, and it's important to look at solutions from a holistic perspective. Following the events of 2011, the Canadian and U.S. governments asked the International Joint Commission to study the causes and impacts of flooding in the Lake Champlain-Richelieu River Basin and to recommend solutions. These may include physical changes in the river to increase flows, as well as best practices for communities in the floodplain, improved forecasting, and other strategies to prepare for and protect against flooding. The floods of 2011 were extreme events, but floods will occur again, especially with the impacts of global climate change. Residents and communities throughout the basin need to become aware of how flooding can impact them. By learning about the risks and actions that can be taken, it may be possible to lessen the impacts of future floods. For more information on the International Joint Commission and its activities in the basin, please visit these sites.
And joining me now is Chris Stepanek. Chris is a UVM Extension Assistant Professor of Watershed Science, Policy, and Education. She is also the Extension Program Leader of the Lake Champlain Sea Grant Program. Welcome, and thanks for coming in. And in addition, you have another job. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, right now I am appointed as the co-chair of the Public Advisory Group of the Lake Champlain-Richelieu River Flood Study. And I'm really pleased as a representative of this study to be able to share with you a little bit about the work that's going on, and as you saw in the video, about the research that we're trying to understand what has happened in 2011 and what kinds of mitigations we might do for flooding in the future.
Right, fabulous. And in the video we saw that it was produced by the International Joint Commission, the IJC. Tell us a little bit more about the IJC and how that works.
Yeah, so the IJC is a government organization. It's focused on protecting shared waters between Canada and the U.S., and it's governed by a treaty called the Boundary Waters Treaty from 1909.
Wow.
It has two main goals. One is to approve projects that relate to flow and water levels, and the other is to research and understand and make recommendations to the two governments about transboundary issues related to water.
Great. And so the goals of the research study around the Richelieu that you're involved in, what are those goals?
A great question. So it's trying to understand what were the causes and impacts of the 2011 floods, and then to look at what can be possible mitigation measures related to flood preparedness, to kinds of moderate structural things that can be done in the river or along the headwaters to protect and move water away from the tributaries to let it lessen the
so we don't
impacts
flood
downstream.
so much.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And is there public participation as part of this study?
Yeah, so a couple different ways. One of the technical working groups is focused on social, political, and economic activities. And one of the things that they're doing is a risk perception study of different stakeholders in the watershed. So they'll be sending out a survey to ask people, how have they been flooded? Where do they get their information about flooding? And what are their kind of risks about different sorts of flood risks? And then a second way is through the public advisory group that I work with. And our job is to make sure that the study technical groups are sharing information about their research and their ideas that they're researching, and getting public feedback and making sure that the public have that opportunity to give input back to the study members.
Right. Okay. And you know, can individuals actually do something about flooding? I mean, that was pretty shocking, and it lasted for over 60 days. I'd forgotten that. But what can individuals do around flooding?
Yeah, so I have three ideas for this. One is, if you're a homeowner or a landowner, to know if your land is in a flood hazard zone or a river corridor, and you can do that using the floodreadyvermont.gov website. There's maps available there to locate that. The second thing I recommend people do is understand where to get flood information. So the National Weather Service is one organization that offers flood watches. That's when conditions are right for flooding. And then they also have flood warnings, which means something's happening and people need to take action right now.
Right away.
And the third thing that I would recommend is, if people have property, do what they can to infiltrate water on site. So plant trees, build a rain garden, celebrate the wetlands that you have. And whatever you can do to minimize water running off downstream, you can protect people downstream from flooding.
Right, getting to go through the soil. Well, certainly some agricultural lands are quite vulnerable to flooding, and they can be hard hit by crop loss or even structural damage. But in a way, some farmers want flooding to happen. So in what ways are ag lands impacted by this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And obviously the farmers are being impacted in negative ways at times, but it's the natural flow of rivers to go out of their banks, to move water onto the land and to let that water slow down and settle out, bringing nutrients, which makes those ag lands productive. So here in the Lake Champlain Basin, a lot of our streams have been disconnected over time from their floodplains with harvesting gravel, for instance, to make highways. And so one of the things that the study researchers are looking at is there opportunity to work with farmers to offer funding to direct water onto ag lands during times of high flows, where we can get it off and out of the tributaries and not heading down to the lake quite so quickly, but to still bring nutrients that are good for the ag lands.
So really have a partnership with the farmers. For those of us that live here, it really makes sense to have Quebec and New York and Vermont working together. And still, it's kind of remarkable that two countries actually can work together. I know policies are very different along the border, but it's very important work. How is that working? What are you seeing happening there? How does
it's really fascinating to be part of the study and to see the different, as we talk to the public and we see what's happening with the study research, and to see the different perspectives and to get that input. But really it's set up the way that it's supposed to. The International Joint Commission is here to look at transboundary issues, to hear from people on both sides, and so I think it really it's working.
So how can viewers learn more about the study and research being done?
So there's a website, it's www.ijc.org/en/LCRR.
There it is. Okay. Chris, thank you so much for coming in today, for your work and working with the Joint Commission. It's very exciting work and very helpful.
Thanks for having me.
And once again, thank you for joining us on Across the Fence. I'm Fran Stoddard.